Good morning. Today we are going to discuss Zhanggui's A Model Village. I hope you enjoy the story and I hope you have seen the videos on Taiwan as well and you have a little bit of an idea about what the story is going to discuss. To give a little bit of a brief background about Taiwan, Taiwan has been variously appropriated or taken over by China and by Japan. Various Chinese governments have the Qing dynasty established their rule there. During the time in the Chinese when the revolution in China came, the what was it called, the Kuomintang, they ran from China to Taiwan and established their government there. So there was a nationalist government during the Sino-Japanese War. When China lost, Taiwan was given over to Japan and they imposed a colonial rule. So basically a lot of different governments have taken over Taiwan and try to rule them. Of course, that meant a lot of instability and a lot of problems for the Taiwanese people. Their culture, their language, their needs, everything was in a big, in a sense, subject to whoever was ruling Taiwan at the moment. Now, Taiwan was a very fertile land with a lot of opportunity, so both sides exploited Taiwan a lot as well. This story, Yankoi's A Model Village, basically discusses a lot of the problems, both related to Japanese assimilationist paradigms, the feudal system that was giving way to, a capitalist system, and it's a critique of the systems as well. Now, this story discusses multiple classes that you will see. Mostly, if we broadly categorize them, they would be the laboring peasant classes and the feudal class that is present there. The feudal class that is now slowly turning into the bourgeois class, because the feudal class's power is waning, so they decide to invest in new industry. They rent out their lands to industry, which is mentioned in the story as well, to the detriment of the people who used to rent the land to grow food in. So one of the biggest problems and challenges of the capitalist age that a lot of countries faced was this, I would say, this instability caused by migrations of a lot of people, because the farming people had nowhere to go. They were suddenly bereft of their lands. They were suddenly told that they had to pay a lot more money, which they could not afford. They could barely survive. So a lot of them moved towards industries and factories so they could work. Now, that kind of movement was something that was happening in Europe. But that movement in Taiwan was rarer because there was less availability of jobs of the kind for the Taiwanese workers. In this story also, Yankoi was himself, he called himself a humanist socialist. He was strongly in favor of Marxist ideas. He did not believe that the means of production should be in the hands of a ruling feudal or capitalist class that could exploit the people who they were ruling and create a lot of poverty and misery in the country. He had seen poverty and misery firsthand. He had been put in jail multiple times because of his activism, because of writing against these people, because of writing against the Japanese atrocities, because of writing against the nationalists' atrocities. So it was his career is a career in critiquing the systems of power that oppress the people, the Taiwanese people. So this is a story which opens with it's a third person narrator who is telling the story of this old man who's called Uncle Beggar, who is trying to make his sons take a break in the extreme heat where they are working before the rainfall to till the fields. Now, this is not easy job. This is a very, very tough job to do. But they can't stop because they know that if they stop, they have very little time. Their time has to be expended according to, first of all, trying to get the land to yield results and crops for their own betterment. But their time is also used by the Japanese officers who make them do things without any payment, and if they don't, they're insulted, they're slapped, their privileges are taken away. So it's a very, very oppressive kind of regime that they are working under. So they're a little impatient with their father when he tells them to get out of the sun. But he is speaking from a position of experience, because he is so old. Yet at this point in history, in time, after working all his life, he doesn't have anything to his name, which tells you the situation of the people, how bad it is, that even though they work all the time, they can barely keep skin and bones together. It is a very, very exploitative system. And then Yang Koi introduces multiple characters throughout this story. I'm not going to go into detail about every single one of the characters, but I'm going to discuss them in terms of what they mean for the story and how do we interpret them using the module's keywords, the Marxist keywords. One of the things that I want to point out is the change that is coming because of the Japanese colonial rule. Master Huan, who is basically the person who is the landlord, he lets these peasants rent their land to grow the crops. He takes a huge amount of profit from the crops and he also makes them pay rent. On the other hand, he is more and more giving up the land to the building of factories because they pay more money. So he is disenfranchising a lot of people who, taking away their crops, taking away their livelihoods, and he doesn't care. He lives in a big house. He is basically the embodiment of what feudal society was like. And the transition to the bourgeois society as well, because now his investments in the bourgeois enterprises means that he's going to slowly transition into the bourgeois capitalist owning class. And that shows the difference between the struggle between the superstructure, which is represented by Master Huan, the officer, the police officer himself, the disciplinary, machinations of the state, like the police, and then there are lower bourgeois classes, you will notice, like the shopkeeper woman and her daughter. Now, they are not considered noble or in the same way as Master Huan Huan is, but they're still owning, they have money, they have their own business, and they can exploit people who are poorer than them, people who basically use their labor to exist. For example, the farmers, the peasants, the teacher who is mentioned in this particular story as well. Also, the term a model village is very ironic, because a model village means, a village that can be a model for discipline, for prosperity, for the perfect look, anything at all. But here, the whole idea is that these people are exploited. These people are put under a lot of, monetary, financial, emotional strain to create the image for the Japanese that this village is doing great by repairing roads, by painting the houses, by putting in new windows, for which later on, they're forced to do it, and then later on they're made to pay money for that as well, money that they don't have, money that they will spend the rest of their lives trying to bring up. That tells you about the kind of exploitation that is going on. Yang Koi is basically trying to draw people's attention to the system that is prevalent at this time. And of course, the story being a critique of that system, he projects each character is representing a certain class. You will see the interests the matchmaker and Master Huan have. As opposed to that, there's Master Huan's son, who has studied abroad, has very definite communist leanings, and brings in subversive texts to help educate the masses so that they can basically overthrow his own father, because he is not in favor of the system. He is against the system. It hurts him. So it tells you about how there are class affiliations that are changing, that people are basically fighting for their means here. Now, I would like to draw your attention to a few things present in this text. So, in part 2, it says the layout of the roads, one more than 3 yards wide through the large fields, made it look like a chessboard. The other, an industrial road, more than 7 yards wide, running north and south, also cut through the field. The roads were benevolent acts of modern civilization. Now, keep this in mind, this is like a Japanese assimilationist idea. Have clear roads, have a certain amount of discipline, make the villagers who are considered lazy, again, in the typical colonialist terms, work very, very hard for absolutely no compensation. So this modernization is only surface deep. This assimilation is only surface deep. The only thing they care about is on the outlook. They don't really care about the people at all. So this is something to keep in mind. Now, this is also another on the next page. It says Officer Kimura, who is representing the police, a very, very corrupt kind of police here, is in collaboration with Master Ruan. Basically, is presenting that the village is the epitome of like perfection in some way, and the Japanese government is going to give them a certificate which the landlord is going to basically accept on the behalf of the people, which is problematic in many ways, because the most of the population is just suffering because of these issues, and he is making money on them, or making a name for himself rather, because of that. There's a paragraph that I want to draw your attention to. Here it says, the people of the village are like oxen, to move only when pulled by the nose. If you let up on them in the slightest, they get lazy. Take the trees on the other side of the public road. For example, when they die and fall, no one bothers to do anything. Now, this is symptomatic of a very, very strong colonialist mind, that people need to focus on what the colonial powers want. The people's own needs are nothing, that if they are not doing exactly what the colonial powers want, that they are lazy, that they are slow. This was the kind of narrative that the slaveholders in the United States used for the slaves. They're lazy, they need to be dealt with harshly to make them work. If you think about it, if you really think about the whole idea of making people do hard labor for no compensation, making them slaves, is really problematic on so many levels. And this is the same kind of narrative here. I mean, it might not be direct slavery, but what options do these people here have? And this is what basically Zhang Gui is showing in this story. It is also a story, another thing that I would like to point out on page number 55. Here is, and in part 3, is the idea of the aging village. The village is aging very quickly, which means that the younger people, they have no respite, nothing in their lives. And the older people have no respite either. They have not earned enough to retire in peace or have anything, And so all they're left with is just sitting and borrowing, having a smoke or getting something from that shop, but not really actually owning anything, actually being at peace. So that thing is basically in question here. I'm going to read this out, hopefully to clarify this idea a little bit. This is the second paragraph, I think the third or fourth line. Yet strangely, the only people seen enjoying the cool were the old folks. There was scarcely a young person to be seen, and the few who were usually outsiders passing by. The young people who worked in the fields rarely had the leisure time to enjoy the refreshing air. As for the sons of the landlords, their rooms were cool and furnished with electric fans, so they would never deign to join the farmers working in the field. Now, the thing that I want to draw your attention to is the binary of the landlord and the working classes. That only the old people who have nothing in their homes, they sit there trying to find, in the last days of their lives, enjoy a little bit of peace. While the landlords in a binary are actually living a very, very good life in comparison. Of course, Master Ruan's son is a different category there. I mean, he might enjoy all those life, but he kind of blurs that binary because he is with the working class people, and that is important to note. Then moving on, another thing that I would like to draw your attention to is the plight of Shen Wenji, the teacher. who has studied, who has worked hard for the civil, so given the exams, but he cannot find a job. That also tells you a little bit about the Japanese colonization, that even though he has worked hard, he has managed to get the desired credentials, they would not have him in the civil service, and he's reduced to poverty by trying to raise chickens and sell them and trying to just barely survive. He's also shown as to be so hardworking and so good. He doesn't really charge money for the things he teaches the peasants' children. So that is also to keep in mind. Now, he, of course, the books that Master Yuan Sun sends him becomes a way to, change the ideas or thoughts of the people around him. These things that he is teaching them are, of course, Marxist in nature, they are communist in nature, and they are teaching these people that they have a right to their life as well. So Chen Wenxi is a very important character because education and educators and people who can teach those teachings are very, very important at this time. Yang Gui, because he himself was, in favor of democracy, in favor of, humanitarian socialism. So all of these ideas are very, very close to him. Now, ironically, at the end of the story, they do get the Model Village Award. One of the characters, who is a poor character, kills himself later on too. The village is, I would call it, in the modern terminology, airbrushed to present it with the best possible appearance to please the Japanese colonizers, but at the cost of the people themselves, at the cost of their livelihoods, at the cost of their basic mental and physical and emotional health. So that is the situation that colonization in Taiwan placed these people in, and basically this text is subversively critiquing those issues. I would like you to think about any other insights that you saw in the text. It's a very long text, and any new ideas, and share them. Okay, thank you. Have a wonderful day.